video to become a Redken artist. I work at JustBhair Hair Salon in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've been here for about a year. At JustBhair, I specialize in blonding and all things hair color. And I chose Redken for the energy. I love the energy, and a story that I like to tell, especially my clients, because I tell them all about this journey and this career path that I hope to take. And people used to say, you know, I looked online when I applied to take my first class at the Redken Exchange. I took color and no why. And everyone says it feels like home, and people kept saying home, and I didn't understand this whole home reference. And you go and you take time off work and you leave your family and you leave your friends and you go and you spend 4 days learning all things hair, and you're in the Redken vibe, you're in the heart of Redken. And to me, there was nothing better. Why would you not want to be surrounded by people that truly believe the same thing that you do? And as I went to leave, you know you're gonna leave, it's a set date, and it was an instant, I wanna come back here. You know, it was a need to be a part of that. It was like, I want to do that. I wanna help, I wanna bring that back, and I wanna contribute. So this is my way of taking that first step, and here we go.
Alright, so in today's video, we are going to be using the Redken Up to 7 Lightener with 2 scoops and 2 ounces of the 30 Volume Pro Oxide Developer. In the Redken Up to 7 Lightener, you can mix it as a 1-to-1 ratio. I love the consistency for balayage, it's very blendable. And then I'm also going to add the 4 mLs of pH bonder to make sure and keep up the integrity of the hair.
Alright, so in today's video, I'm going to teach you a little bit about how to do a surface paint instead of an all the way through, I think is what more of a traditional balayage. So, and I think the beauty of it too is that the color that you're going to get is really going to be more of a dimensional, to me more of a modern approach, and not as blonding as a reference. So what I'm going to go ahead and start is just put my mannequin into 4 quads to just even out like a clean section. Because when you're working with any kind of balayage, I think as a whole, the application is a little more obviously freehand, but in order to achieve a clean look without any spots or anything like that, you have to make sure it stays clean. So I'm gonna start off just by clipping off the section I'm gonna start in first. And start here. So as you can see, just to kind of show you a little bit about what's about to happen, here is, I've already prepped an after mannequin, and here is to the finished look. It is going to be more of a soft, more of a subtle balayage, going back to the whole purpose behind only painting on the surface. So going through, always keeping the money pieces bright, just to hit a few points that we've already gone over, just to kind of clean everything up, to make sure that the brush stays more flat on the hair and you're not pushing the color too far in. Another thing to make sure of, that you're taking a triangle section to make sure the depth stays underneath so the highlights have something to pop against. Here is kind of the result. So as you can see, this is the before. And as far as after goes, I really just was going for more of a golden, more of a touch of color, and not absolutely going through and blonding her whole head. So just to give you a little bit of after, let's get started. Alright, so next on to the sectioning. As you can see, I'm taking a diagonal back slice in this front quadrant here, ready to take my first section. So I'm going to choose to balayage in more of a triangle section. So just creating the 3 points. And someone might ask why I'm choosing to balayage in a triangle, and I believe that it helps me to keep the depth. Because if you are just painting on the surface, as I'm about to show and as I showed on my mannequin, it's the only hair that is being affected by the color is on the surface. So as you go to paint and you paint the ends, you might get a little bit through on those, but the ends are always going to be a little bit brighter. So I'm going to start here, take a little bit of color, paint this front piece here. so continuing the diagonal back slices, and take this section, and like I said before, keeping everything really clean. This is already more of a, let's say, a free-spirited color. So by keeping a clean section, it's going to ensure that the results are more even and a little more consistent. So I'm still going to keep the triangle going, but anytime I get a section that's this wide, I always like to break it into two, only because I feel that you can control more the smaller pieces you have. So I'm still going to take that triangle, using this here as my, I guess, base. And using this as my piece A, let's call it. So taking a little bit of color. I never like to use more than just a little bit on this brush, especially if you're using on that first initial sweep, only because a little bit of color is a lot easier to blend than a lot of color. So starting off really soft and a lot lower than I would like for it to end up, because blending up is always going to be a little bit more natural. Elevating the hair as I'm going to make sure it stays really nice and soft at the root. And then dropping it as I get more into like the zone 2 and 3. As I work my way up these quads, another thing to just ensure to take your balayage all the way up to the next level is, instead of painting the same stroke on each and every piece, changing it up some. So on this front piece here, I painted just a strong piece on the front, and then just a little bit of blending in the back. Here, I'm gonna go through and paint each side, and still the bottom to blend that there, but to keep the dimension going so nothing gets too uniform. Notice how I turn my brush. Anytime you keep the brush flat and you're not pointing at it, you're always gonna get a smoother finish. And that's really what balayage is all about, is keeping the saturation even enough to get that nice open air glow. All right, so slowly blending that up, and remembering you want the contrast, you want a little bit of depth. All right, so this piece, I would say, is one of the most important on a balayage. It's the piece that's right in front. She's always gonna see it first, and it's gonna be what other people also see. So as people like to call a money piece, I like to keep it really nice and strong. So keeping a clean brush is really even more important there than anything. All right, so I'm gonna elevate the hair a little bit above, to make sure everything, like I said, stays nice and soft. And going through and really just sweeping that color onto the hair. Biggest tip I would say is, when people never come in this way, it can tend to be a little more challenging and go through the hair. So going back to keeping the brush laying flat on the hair. And really just lightly blending it up to the root. And you can see when it comes to the surface paint, as soon as you kind of push that hair a little bit, you can see all up here, all the hair that's not being touched. You're still gonna have the highlights all the way up to the root, but it's gonna keep the depth into where it moves. All right, so as you can see in the previous section too, just by keeping it split, you're gonna keep your sections clean. You're also gonna make sure that the saturation is even. Now with that being said, also keep in mind the kind of look that I'm going for on my model. And so to make sure, I'm gonna keep this one, I'm gonna take one section, I'm gonna leave a little bit of hair on each side. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna attempt to act a little bit like a low light to make sure that I leave a little bit of that natural, but also still get the coverage that I'm looking for. So here's piece one, and then still keeping that triangle, and two. And on this one, as I start to work towards the back of the head, I always find that keeping a little bit more root there is always gonna be more natural. Making sure even saturation on the ends, keeping the brush flat, using the whole thing to our advantage, the saturation even. And the next thing I was talking a little bit about too was keeping a little bit more depth once you start to work towards the back of the head. And like I said, all of this changes depending on the look that you're going for. But in my particular case, I want something really natural and really just more like a little kid's highlights, where it's more of the sun on the surface. So keeping that in mind, I'm gonna leave this all nice and strong underneath, and as I start to work my way up, I'm really gonna really try to focus more on keeping the interior darker and the ends lighter. All right, so keeping the triangle section, I'm gonna use 1, 2, and cutting that corner off at 3, putting every low light to the side, keeping everything really clean. All right, so like I said, trying to work, keeping the back a little more natural. I'm gonna start out kind of in reverse to what I was before. So still keeping the brush flat, I'm gonna work more at the ends and really just try to get a nice even line here. All right, moving on to this side. As you can see, another thing that might seem like an obvious point, but something I'd like to point out. She does have a side part. So when it comes to coloring hair, it doesn't matter if you're foiling or any kind of color placement to where you want to create some lightness. This being the shallow side, you have to think as a colorist, how much color are you wanting on each side? The biggest thing is you want to create balance. You want her to be able to move and have color on each side of her head and it not be really blonde on this side and only pieces on this side. And so with that being said, you also only want to compensate for that. And so I'm going to go through and still take a diagonal back and still balayage on a triangle, but I'm not going to take as many sections. Keeping everything natural and keeping it to where it's going to line up on the opposite side of her head. So clean brush going through. A big question I get a lot when I start to balayage is, how do you choose the brush? I know a lot of people get fancy and they use a lot of different brushes. I've seen a lot of actual like paint brushes that also come into play. I think that it comes into preference. I think anything that you're the most comfortable with is what you're going to do best at using. I like to choose anything that has a long actual brush to make sure that I have enough room to move. So I am doing a surface paint, as we've talked about. It is going to be more natural. So I chose the smaller brush that Redken makes, but I also, in case, have this one because this is more of like my go-to. As we sit on the other side, keeping it really soft, elevating that hair up to give her a few pieces around her face that will always stay nice and bright. All right, so now comes the big question, the money piece on the opposite side. So earlier when I was talking about everything being symmetrical, it is more important now than ever. Make sure, still keeping that low light out, you want these two to almost be like a mirror. If anything is the same on your balayage, you want it to be that front piece. So still taking a little bit of color, you want to have the ultimate control. So I'm going to come in and start really low. Because like I said earlier, you can always blend higher. It's really hard to take it back off though. So still keeping that really nice and soft. I'm not pushing the color through, I'm simply laying it on top of the hair, blending this side up, kind of having in mind what I'm trying to also create over here. So working with really, really small amounts of color. Going through, keeping the saturation heavy on these ends, because if the saturation isn't there, then the lift is not going to happen. So really nice and soft, elevating the hair as I go. Another key point, when it comes to doing an open air technique, I know that I've been talking about keeping your sections clean. It's more also important too to watch how you're laying the hair. You can put the hair anywhere you want to lay it as long as you paint it as a purpose and not in hopes that bleach isn't or lightener isn't all over your other sections. All right, and so to keep it going, I'm still going to paint the hair, pulling it a little bit, keeping it nice and soft, and I'm literally gonna pull the hair exactly where I wanna lay it and kind of place it there, keeping it to where it's not overlapping any of the sections, but all of this is still gonna stay nice and clean. All right, just like on the other side, I'm really gonna work at the bottom, keeping the saturation here and slowly starting to give those tiny little, almost like a whisper of color on these ends of the section. Just kind of ever so softly blurring that up a little bit. Just like on that last piece, I'm gonna pull that hair up over to the side. All right, so keeping in mind the highs and lows of the painting that you just did, anytime you go to curl the hair, it's always going to give the best look. It's going to kind of give a little bit of a way for a light to pop against a dark. So I chose to do more of a beach wave using like a 1.5 inch a Marcel iron. Then I also prepped the hair afterwards using my Fashion Waves 07 to make sure and give the hair a little bit of texture, a little bit of grip. And then after I let that set, I went through with my windblown to kind of create more of a windblown look, keeping everything a little piecier and a little more airy. So that concludes my Redken artistry video. I appreciate you watching, and if you'd like to see more, head over to my Instagram.
All right.